Today, the world is home to absolutely ginormous companies. Apple, Microsoft. I could go on and on, but honestly, I don't even need to because in school, you were taught how to use their products, and today at your job, you probably use them every single day. But the question is, how large can these companies actually get? And are they anywhere near some hypothetical limit, or do they have decades of growth ahead of them? Right, so the first thing we need to understand is market cap, because this is a measure of size for companies. So public companies have shares that you can buy and sell on the secondary open market, and this is how people trade ownership of companies. And if you add up the value of all the outstanding shares, that's the total net worth of the company, aka the market cap. So hypothetically, if there's 1 million shares outstanding, each share is trading at $200, then the market cap is $200 million. The next concept is the valuation itself. So that's how do people in the free market come to a determination of how much the share price should even be. The most common way this is done is via the PE ratio, or the price to earnings ratio. This is a very nifty website. I'll leave a link down below. I keep it open at all times on my computer because I am a nerd. But it says here the PE ratio is a classic measure of a stock's value, indicating how many years of profits at the current earnings rate it takes to recoup an investment in the stock. And for the S&P 500, which is a general benchmark of the US stock market, the current PE ratio is about 28. So what this is really saying is a company's value is based off of its earnings, how much money and profit the company can generate. After all, in a capitalist society, how much money something produces dictates its value. So people and traders on the secondary market take a look at these earnings and they apply a multiple to them. So they would say the value of the company is 28 times current earnings. Big caveat, however, all because that's how the market in theory should work, doesn't mean that's always the case. In reality, we go through these broad market cycles where valuations increase and decrease relative to earnings. But the takeaway here is the market cap of a company is determined by a multiple applied to the earnings. If a company makes more money, sells more product, gains market share, innovates, develop competitive advantages, its value on the open market will increase. All right, but getting back to the question, how large can companies like Apple and Microsoft realistically get? Well, to help us answer this question, we can actually look at history, because believe it or not, there's a company lurking in the past that dwarfs even today's tech giants. And this revolutionary company, of course, was the Dutch East India Company. It was founded in 1602 and was granted a monopoly by the Dutch government over Asian trade. The company mostly traded spices and other stuff that was not native to the European continent, also some slaves. But focusing on the positives, this company revolutionized the financial system and laid the groundwork for the advancements we enjoy today. Because the VOC, which is the abbreviation for the Dutch East India Company, was the first public company that was traded on an early version of the stock exchange. Prior to this innovation, if you wanted to send a voyage overseas to do these operations, gather spices, bring them back to the European market, it was usually funded and controlled by one entity, the king, because that was the only person that had the resources to conduct such an operation. And it was extremely risky. A majority of these early voyages ended in failure, complete loss. So even though there was a huge demand for these products in the European market, getting it there was very inefficient. But with the introduction of the Dutch East India Company and this public ownership, a collection of everyday people could pool their money together to finance these voyages. And that does a couple of things. One is that it helps to diffuse and spread out the risk involved in such an operation. And two, it allows the everyday person to benefit from these activities. Prior to this, again, it was only the king and the head of state that really profited from these voyages and the resulting economic activity. This helped to democratize the profits, which, by the way, is a huge component of modern day society. In fact, the stock market in the United States is one of the leading ways people everyday citizens can become rich over their lifetimes. Even the kings at the time benefited from this system, and that's why they granted the company monopoly status. It meant that they no longer had to take the risk and finance these voyages themselves, and it allowed the scale of these operations to reach a level never prior dreamt of. And to give you guys a visual on what the Dutch East India Company actually did, here's a map of the most common trade routes and what exactly they were trading. So the route spread from the Arabian Peninsula to India, the Dutch East Indies, China, and all the way to Japan. And they traded mostly raw goods, things like coffee, silk, silver, different metals, ores, and things like tea and sugar. The company existed for about 200 years, and at its peak in the mid-1600s, it had its own standing army, navy, could negotiate treaties with local governments, and it had a reported market cap of $7.9 trillion adjusted for inflation. And just for kicks, if we apply today's valuation method to this company and work backwards, we can deduct that the company at its peak would have earned, according to today's valuation metric, $263 billion per year. Again, this is probably completely wrong, but it should just kind of give you some perspective compared to today's largest company, Apple, which has a value of $2.9 trillion and generates just shy of $100 billion per year. So it seems like today's tech giants have a long path of growth ahead of them. Some people even predict that if Apple can continue to grow their earnings at a pretty modest 7 to 10% per year, then by 2030, their market cap could be between $4 and $5 trillion, quickly closing in on the OG, the largest company to ever exist. And even with a large company like Apple, there's no reason to think they can't sustain 7 to 10% earnings growth per year. Back in the day with the Dutch East India Company, that kind of growth at their level would have been very difficult to sustain. They essentially would have had to grow exports by 7 to 10% every single year. But modern companies in advanced economies focus on value-adding activities. So unlike the VOC, Apple doesn't just ship raw goods. Instead, they take these as inputs and they transform them into more valuable end products. To put it simply, an iPhone is worth more than the sum of its parts. And if you look at the first generation iPhone and compare it to the modern iPhone, the inputs are the same. However, due to innovation, continuous research and development, the product itself has become significantly more valuable. And this process of adding value is really just limited by the pace of technological innovation. So that's why a market cap of $8 trillion achieved by the largest company ever to exist, I don't think represents a meaningful cap to the size companies can achieve in modern economies. I think modern day tech giants, if they can sustain their competitive advantage, maintain their high levels of research development, continuously adding value to their products, there's really no upper limit to how large and successful they can become.